I didn't fall apart. That's the part nobody expected. They expected tears, maybe a phone call full of apologies, maybe me showing up at their door with a casserole and a smile, pretending the whole thing hadn't happened. That's what I'd always done before. That's what I was known for. The one who smoothed things over, who made it easy, who never made anyone feel uncomfortable about what they'd taken from me. But this time, I just sat at my kitchen table in Columbus with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. And I thought, okay, now I know exactly where I stand. And I was fine. I think that surprised me more than anything else. I grew up in a house where love was distributed unevenly, and everyone knew it, but no one was allowed to say so. My older sister got the bigger bedroom, the better birthday parties, the longer hugs. I got told I was low maintenance, which I understand now was just a polite way of saying I'd learned not to ask for much because asking hadn't worked. My sister is 3 years older than me. She married her college boyfriend, had 2 kids by 28, and moved back to our hometown in Dayton, about an hour from where my parents still live. I moved to Columbus after college for a job at a logistics company, worked my way up slowly, quietly, the way I did everything. I wasn't flashy. I didn't need to be. My parents were proud of my sister in the way you could see and point to. She gave them grandchildren. She showed up every Sunday. She was present in a way I wasn't, geographically and otherwise, and for a long time I told myself that's why she got more. Not favoritism, just proximity. I wanted that to be true. I worked very hard to believe it. I sent money when things got tight. Not a lot at first. 100 here, 200 there. Stuff I told myself didn't count because it was family and family helped each other. But then my sister's husband lost his job. Then they had a car payment they couldn't make. Then there was something with the kids' daycare, and my mom called and asked in that careful voice she used. When she was about to ask me for something, she already knew she had no right to ask. You know your sister is going through a hard time. I know, she's really struggling. I know, Mom. You've always been so capable, so good at handling things, and there it was. You're capable, which meant you can afford to give. It wasn't a question. It was never a question. I sent the money. $400. Then $600 the next month when something came up with the furnace. Then $300 in the spring because the kids needed new shoes and summer clothes. And my sister was still not working, and my brother-in-law was doing freelance stuff that seemed to generate a lot of conversation and very little income. I didn't say anything. I kept sending the money, and I kept going to Columbus and going to work and paying my own rent and my own car note and putting a little aside every month like I'd always done, and I told myself this was temporary. Things would turn around for them. It would balance out. It didn't balance out. The summer I turned 31, I drove home for my niece's birthday party. It was a Saturday in July, hot and bright, the kind of day that makes Ohio look almost pretty. I'd bought a present, a craft kit she'd seen at a store and pointed at twice, which I'd noticed, and my sister had not, and I'd driven the full hour and 15 minutes without complaint. My mom was in the kitchen when I walked in. She hugged me, quick and efficient, then turned back to the counter where she was arranging food. My dad was in the living room watching something with the volume too high. My sister was outside on the deck with her husband and a couple of their friends, laughing at something. I put the present on the table and went to help my mom. "Where do you want me?" I asked. She handed me a bag of ice and pointed at the cooler. "Outside." I did that. I helped carry things out. I refilled the chip bowl. I entertained my niece when she got overwhelmed by all the people and needed someone quiet to sit with. I cleaned up plates. I did all of this without anyone asking me to, because that was the shape of my role in that family. I was the infrastructure. I kept things running. No one noticed unless I stopped. At some point, I went inside to get more napkins and I overheard my parents in the kitchen. They didn't hear me come in. I should have made a noise. I didn't. My dad was saying something about a car. My sister needed a car, not a new one, but something reliable, something the kids could be safe in. My brother-in-law's truck had been having problems. They were trying to figure out the money. And my mom said, in a voice so matter-of-fact, it didn't even register as cruelty at first, "We'll ask her." She doesn't have kids. She doesn't have a mortgage. She can manage. My dad said, "You think she'll do it?" And my mom said, "She always does." I stood there in the doorway for a second, just 1 second. Then I got the napkins and went back outside. That night, driving home, I turned the radio off and drove in silence the whole way. I want to be clear about something because I think people misunderstand this. I wasn't angry at my sister. Not really. My sister was doing what she'd always been allowed to do, reach out her hand and have it filled. That wasn't her fault. It was what she'd been taught. What I was starting to feel, sitting with in the weeks after that birthday party, was something colder and more clarifying than anger. It was the sensation of seeing something exactly as it was, maybe for the first time. I was a resource. I was useful. I was not, in my family, the daughter they worried about or celebrated or checked in on to see how I was doing. I was the one they called when they needed something managed. And I had spent 31 years accepting this as my role because it was the only one on offer. I thought about the comment my mom made. She doesn't have kids, she doesn't have a mortgage. And I realized that in her mind, my stability was not something I'd built through careful, unglamorous choices over a decade. It was just a resource available for redistribution. She wasn't proud of my discipline. She saw it as availability. I stopped calling as often. Not dramatically, I didn't announce anything or write a letter. I just pulled back slightly, answered texts more slowly, was busy on a few Sundays, let some calls go to voicemail and responded hours later. No one noticed. That was its own answer. About 2 months after the birthday party, my mom called on a Tuesday evening. I let it ring once, then picked up. "Hey, Mom, hi, honey." She sounded warm, relaxed. This was her asking voice. I'd learned to read the temperature. "I wanted to talk to you about something. You know how we've been trying to figure out your sister's car situation?" "Yeah, well, we found something. A used Civic, only 60,000 miles. Good price." I waited. "We were wondering if you could help with the down payment. It's $3,000. $3,000, not $100. Not could you cover half. $3,000. Dad and I would put in $500, she added. And your sister would pay you back when things stabilize." I was quiet for a moment, not because I was deciding. I'd already decided, somewhere on that dark highway 2 months ago. I was quiet because I wanted to hear how she would fill the silence. She said, "You're always so good about these things. We know you'll come through." And something in me went completely still. "Mom," I said, "I have to be honest with you. I can't do that." A pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't give $3,000 for a car. I have my own expenses. I have my own savings goals. I can't keep being the family bank." The silence that followed was different from before. This one was cold. "I'm not asking you to be a bank," she said carefully. "I'm asking you to help your sister. She has children. I know she does. She's struggling. I know. You don't have those kinds of responsibilities." "Mom," I kept my voice even. "I have responsibilities. You just don't see them because they're mine and no one else is affected when I don't meet them. But they exist." There was a longer pause. Then she said something that I've thought about almost every day since. She didn't yell it. She didn't say it meanly, even. She said it like it was simply a fact she was finally making explicit, like she was doing me a favor by clarifying. She said, "Your sister's family has to come first. That's just the reality. They have more needs. You've always been the one who can handle things on your own. We've always known you'd be last." Seconds passed. I said, "Good to know." She waited for more. I didn't give her any. "That's it?" she said. "That's it." I said I had to go and I got off the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I went and sat on my balcony and looked at the city lights, and I felt something settle in my chest like a stone finding the bottom of a lake. Heavy but also final, also still. "You'll always be last." She'd meant it as a justification. A reason I should be okay with giving. What she'd actually done was hand me a map. I want to explain what happened next, because I think people expect a moment of dramatic confrontation, and that's not what it was. There was no screaming match. There was no single conversation where I laid everything out and made them understand. I've seen those conversations in movies, and they almost never work in real life. Because the people who treat you as a resource don't become capable of seeing you as a person just because you get emotional at them. What I did was simpler and more permanent. I made a list, which is what I do when I need to think clearly. I wrote down every financial contribution I'd made to my family in the past 3 years. When I was done, the number at the bottom was $8,400. I stared at that number for a while. Then I folded the paper and put it in a drawer, and I made myself one quiet promise. Not a dollar more. Not because I was punishing them. Not because I wanted them to suffer. But because I finally understood, the way you understand something not intellectually but in your body, that the money I sent wasn't being received as a gift or even as a loan. It was being received as a baseline expectation, as my tithe, as the price of belonging to a family that had decided my role before I was old enough to have a say in it. I also stopped making myself available on short notice. My sister would text me sometimes, "Can you call tonight? I need advice," and I used to rearrange my whole evening for those calls. I started saying I was busy and getting back to her 2 or 3 days later. She didn't seem to register the difference. I started spending my weekends differently. I signed up for a pottery class, which sounds minor but felt enormous because it was the first thing I'd done in years, purely because I wanted to. I made friends in that class. I went for longer runs. I started putting money into a travel savings account, not for anything specific yet, just for the pleasure of watching it grow towards something that was entirely mine. My parents called occasionally. I answered. I was polite. I gave nothing extra. When my mom would probe, "Things have just been so hard for your sister," I'd say I'm sorry to hear that and change the subject, and I got good at not letting the silence do what it used to do to me, which was to fill it with offers. The months went by. I felt lighter than I had in years. It was the following February when my mom called and her voice was different. Not her asking voice, something shakier, something genuinely distressed. My father had been in a minor car accident. He was fine, a fender bender, nothing serious, no one hurt. But the other car had filed an insurance claim, and it was more complicated than they'd expected, and they'd gotten some unexpected bills. And on top of that, the furnace in their house had gone out, and my sister's family was already staying with them temporarily, because my brother-in-law had finally gotten a job. But they were waiting on the first few paychecks before they could get a place. The house was full. There were money problems. My dad was stressed. My mom was overwhelmed. "We're just trying to figure out what to do," she said. I listened. I said, at the right moments. When she finished, I said, "That sounds really stressful. I hope it works out." There was a silence. "Is there anything you can do to help?" she asked. Not "will you help?" She actually framed it as a question. She must have known, somehow, that something had shifted, even if she couldn't have named what. "I don't think so," I said. "I have things of my own going on financially. But I hope you're able to figure it out." The silence this time was long. Long enough that I started to wonder if the call had dropped. "I see," my mom finally said. She sounded confused. Not angry, not at first, genuinely confused, like I'd answered a question in a language she didn't expect. I had always come through. The idea that I might not had simply not been in her model of how things worked. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said, and I was. "I'd like to tell you there was a reckoning. I'd like to tell you my mother called back a week later and said I'd been thinking about what I said in August, and I realize how unfair we've been to you, and I'm so sorry. I'd like to say my sister reached out and told me she'd always taken me for granted and that she was going to do better. That didn't happen. At least not in any clean, neat way. What actually happened was more gradual and harder to describe. My sister started texting me less, maybe because I was slower to respond and she got out of the habit, or maybe because something in my energy had changed and she sensed it without knowing why. My parents' calls shortened. There was less probing, less soft-voiced setup, less of those long pauses loaded with expectation. Whether that was respect or resignation, I'm honestly not sure. Probably some of both. My mom did say something to me, about 4 months after the February call. We were talking on the phone about something ordinary, a recipe she'd been trying, I think, and she said almost offhandedly, "You've seemed different lately." "Different how?" I asked. She thought about it. "Quieter, more, separate. I've been busy," I said. "Are you happy?" The question surprised me enough that I actually thought about it before answering. I looked around my apartment. The pottery pieces lined up on the shelf, the travel account balance I'd checked that morning, the plans I'd made for the weekend that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs. "Yeah," I said, "I really am." She didn't respond to that immediately. Then she said, "Good," in a voice I couldn't entirely read. We got off the phone a few minutes later. I stood in my kitchen for a moment, feeling the ordinary weight of an ordinary evening. Dinner to make, a book I was partway through, a run I'd been looking forward to. And I thought about something I'd read once, the idea that you teach people how to treat you not by what you say, but by what you accept. For years I had accepted being last without complaint, and in doing so I had confirmed, over and over, that last was fine, that I didn't mind, that the shape of my life could bend to fit whatever everyone else needed. I'd always thought my silence was graceful, that I was the calm one, the easy one, the one who didn't make things complicated. What I understood now was that my silence hadn't been grace. It had been a subsidy. I had been quietly funding a dynamic that kept me invisible, and I had done it so smoothly and consistently that no one had even noticed it was a choice. Stopping was also a choice, a quieter one, harder to see, but permanent in a way that no confrontation would have been. The pottery class ended, but I signed up for the next session. I went to Nashville in March, my first solo trip, 4 days, no itinerary beyond a few things I wanted to see. I ate at a restaurant bar by myself on the first night, which I'd never done before, and ordered something off the menu I'd never heard of, and talked to the bartender about local music, and felt more like a full person than I had in years. I called my mom from the hotel on the third night, just to check in. She sounded surprised I'd called from somewhere other than Columbus. I told her about the restaurant, the neighborhood I'd walked through, the record store I'd found. She said, "That sounds like fun." I said, "It really is." I wasn't performing contentment. I wasn't trying to send a message or make a point. I was just a person on a trip they'd saved for, calling their mother, telling her something true. The thing I'd been afraid of, for so long, without even naming it, was that if I stopped being useful, I'd stop being loved. That the love in my family was transactional, and if I stopped making transactions, I'd lose my place entirely. But here's the thing I'm still working out. I'm not sure my place was ever what I thought it was. I'm not sure last is a place you can lose. And I'm not sure love that depends on your continued availability and sacrifice is the kind worth organizing your life around. I'm still figuring that out. I'm still in contact with my family. We talk. We see each other on holidays. There's something there. Something genuine in certain moments. The way my dad laughs at his own jokes before he finishes them. The way my mom still knows exactly how I take my coffee. Family is complicated, and I'm not interested in pretending otherwise. But I go back to Columbus now, to my apartment and my pottery shelf and my savings account and the run route I know by heart. And I go back as myself, not as a resource, not as infrastructure, not as the capable one who can handle anything, not as last. I go back as someone who finally understood what good to know actually meant. It meant, I see you clearly now, and I'm going to act accordingly. It meant, I'm not angry, I'm just done. It meant, for the first time in my adult life, I stopped waiting for a family that had already told me my place, and I went and built a life that put me first. Not out of spite, not even out of self-protection really, just because I finally believed that I deserved one.